The mud was thick beneath her boots as Sarah Chun hit the ground for the 7th time that morning. Around her, 200 of the Navy's most elite candidates watched as she struggled to her knees, her soaked training uniform clinging to her frame. The instructors exchanged knowing glances. Another washout, they figured, just like the dozens who'd quit before breakfast. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But as Sarah wiped the blood from her split lip and locked eyes with Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, something shifted in the air. The same woman who couldn't complete a single obstacle course rep was about to attempt something no Navy SEAL had ever accomplished in the program's 70-year history. What happened next would rewrite the record books forever. The alarm pierced. Through the pre-dawn darkness at exactly 0430 hours, just as it had every morning for the past 6 weeks at Naval Special Warfare Training Command in Virginia Beach, Sarah Chun's eyes snapped open in her narrow bunk, her body already conditioned to respond before her mind fully processed the sound. Around her, 19 other candidates stirred in the cramped barracks, their movements mechanical after weeks of relentless conditioning. Sarah swung her legs over the side of her bunk and planted her feet on the cold concrete floor. At 5'4" and 127 pounds, she was easily the smallest person in the program, dwarfed by teammates who looked like they'd been carved from granite. Her compact frame had earned her the nickname Pocket Rocket from some of the more supportive candidates, though others weren't nearly as kind. The morning routine was always the same. Dress in 30 seconds, form up outside in formation, begin. The day with a 5-mile run through the soft sand dunes that bordered the Atlantic. What made this morning different was the presence of Admiral Patricia Wallace, a legend in naval special warfare, standing beside the usual cadre of instructors as the candidates assembled in the pre-dawn gloom. Today marks the beginning of Phase 3, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the formation with military precision. Hell Week is behind you. The academic phase is complete. What lies ahead will separate those who wear the trident from those who go home. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Phase 3 was notorious throughout the Navy. It was where candidates faced the program's most challenging physical and mental tests, designed to push human endurance beyond what most believed possible. The dropout rate during this phase was astronomical, with even the strongest candidates often calling it quits within the first week. The training evolution you'll face today has never been completed successfully by any candidate in this program's history. Admiral Wallace stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming in the floodlights. It's a test we've reserved for only the most exceptional classes. Your instructors believe this group has what it takes to make history. The evolution was deceptively simple in concept. Candidates would navigate a 3-mile obstacle course that incorporated every skill they'd learned: underwater demolition, rope climbing, weapons handling, medical response, and strategic planning. The catch was the time limit. Based on decades of performance data, the course had been calibrated so that completion in under 90 minutes was theoretically impossible for a human being. The current record stood at 94 minutes and 37 seconds, set by Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison in 2019. Morrison had gone on to lead some of the most classified operations in recent military history. His record had stood unchallenged for 6 years, with most candidates finishing closer to the 2-hour mark. If they finished at all. As the candidates moved to the starting line, Sarah found herself placed in the third group of 5. The instructors had arranged them by previous performance metrics, putting the strongest candidates first. Sarah's placement in the middle group was actually generous, considering her struggle with some of the physical components throughout training. The first group launched into the course with explosive energy. Sarah watched as Marcus Thompson, a former college football player from Texas, attacked the rope climb with the power of a machine. Behind him, Jennifer Walsh, an ex-Marine from Boston, moved through the underwater section with the grace of a dolphin. These were the candidates everyone expected to excel. But as Sarah observed their technique, she began to notice something the others missed. Thompson was burning energy too quickly on the early obstacles, his massive frame working against him. In the endurance sections, Walsh was technically perfect, but took extra time ensuring every movement was textbook correct. The other high performers all had similar patterns. They were optimized for individual obstacles, but not for the course as a complete system. When the second group began, Sarah paid even closer attention. These candidates had learned from watching the first group, but they were making different mistakes. They were pacing themselves too conservatively early on, leaving themselves too much ground to make up in the final sections where fatigue would be at its peak. Sarah's mind began working differently than her competitors. While they focused on conquering each obstacle, she started visualizing the course as a single flowing sequence. She identified 4 critical transition points where seconds could be gained or lost, and 3 technical sections where her smaller size might actually provide an advantage. Group 3, you're up. Chief Rodriguez's voice cut through her analysis. Sarah approached the starting line alongside 4 male candidates who each outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. To her left stood Danny Morrison, Jake Morrison's younger brother, carrying the weight of family legacy on his shoulders. To her right was Alex Petrov, a former Army Ranger whose competitive streak had driven him to the top of every previous exercise. The starting horn blasted, and Sarah exploded forward with a burst of speed that surprised even herself. While her teammates powered through the initial rope traverse using pure upper body strength, Sarah used a technique she'd developed during her rock climbing days, incorporating her legs to maintain momentum while conserving energy for later. First major obstacle was a 50-meter underwater swim, followed immediately by a 100-foot rope climb. Most candidates approached this as 2 separate challenges, taking time to recover between them. Sarah had a different plan. She hit the water at full speed and immediately dropped into the most efficient swimming stroke she knew, not the powerful freestyle most candidates used, but a modified combat side stroke that allowed her to cover distance while barely elevating her heart rate. She surfaced at the far end while her competitors were still mid-swim, but instead of stopping to catch her breath, she launched directly into the rope climb. Her smaller hands found purchase on the rope, and she began ascending using a technique that looked almost effortless. While others hauled themselves up with brute force, Sarah moved in a rhythm that incorporated her entire body, flowing upward like water running in reverse. She crested the top of the rope as the first of her groupmates emerged from the pool. Below, the advantage was temporary, but significant. The next section involved navigating a series of balance beams while carrying a 40-pound pack, then immediately transitioning into a weapons handling course that required precision shooting. From multiple positions, this was where Sarah's size worked against her. The pack represented a much higher percentage of her body weight than it did for her larger competitors, and the shooting positions were calibrated for average-sized candidates. She had to fully extend her arms to reach the rifle rests, and the recoil knocked her off balance with each shot. Danny Morrison passed her during the shooting section, his familiarity with the weapons evident in every smooth motion. Alex Petrov caught up during the pack carry, his Army training showing as he maintained perfect form, even under the heavy load. But Sarah wasn't discouraged. She was exactly where her mental map of the course said she should be at this point. The real test was still coming. The course's midpoint featured what instructors called the gauntlet, a series of connected obstacles that had to be completed as a single sequence. Candidates crawled under barbed wire, climbed over 12-foot walls, navigated a rope bridge, and concluded with a 100-yard low crawl through thick mud, all without stopping. This was where technique mattered more than raw strength, and where Sarah's years of competitive gymnastics finally paid dividends. She moved through the sequence like it was a floor routine, each transition planned and executed with precision. Her low center of gravity helped her maintain balance on the rope bridge, and her flexibility allowed her to navigate the tight spaces more efficiently than her larger competitors. By the time she emerged from the mud at the end of the gauntlet, Sarah had regained the lead she'd held early in the course. But she was also beginning to feel the accumulated fatigue. Her legs trembled slightly as she approached the next obstacle, and her breathing was becoming labored. The fourth major section tested medical response capabilities. Candidates had to stabilize a simulated casualty, call it a medical evacuation, and then carry the 180-pound dummy 300 yards to the extraction point. The dummy weighed nearly 40% more than Sarah did. She watched Danny Morrison hoist the dummy onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry and stride away with what looked like minimal effort. Alex Petrov chose a different technique, dragging the dummy behind him, sacrificing speed for endurance management. Sarah knew she couldn't match their approaches. Instead, she improvised a method she'd seen rescue swimmers use, rolling the dummy onto a tarp and pulling it sled-style behind her. It looked unconventional, but it allowed her to use her whole body efficiently and maintain a steady pace. The technique worked, but it couldn't fully compensate for the physical disadvantage. Both Morrison and Petrov passed her during this section, and she could hear the third candidate in her group closing the gap behind her. As she reached the medical extraction point, Sarah was running in third place with approximately 30 minutes remaining on the course. The final section loomed ahead, a combination endurance and problem-solving test that required candidates to complete a series of puzzles while maintaining continuous physical exertion. This was traditionally where the strongest candidates pulled away from the field, using their superior physical reserves to maintain mental clarity while others faltered. Sarah could feel her energy stores depleting, and she knew the conventional approach wouldn't work for her. But as she approached the final section, Sarah remembered something Admiral Wallace had said during a leadership lecture weeks earlier. The most dangerous opponents are those who refuse to play by the rules you expect them to follow. Instead of attacking the final section with the methodical, linear approach every other candidate was using, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed reckless to outside observers. She was going to attempt something that went against every piece of tactical wisdom she'd been taught. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was going to sprint. The final obstacles were designed to be completed in sequence. A rope climb, a puzzle station, a cargo net traverse, another puzzle station, a wall climb, a final puzzle, and then a quarter-mile run to the finish line. The puzzle stations were the bottlenecks. They required candidates to solve complex, logical problems while their bodies screamed for rest. Sarah's plan was to complete the physical obstacles so quickly that she'd have extra time at each puzzle station, allowing her to work the problems while actually recovering instead of while accumulating more fatigue. It was a strategy that could either cut significant time off her finish or completely exhaust her before she reached the end. As she launched into her sprint, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The fatigue was still there, but it was no longer controlling her movements. Her body found a rhythm that felt almost supernatural, her muscles responding with precision. Despite the accumulated stress of the previous hour, she attacked the rope climb with explosive power, reaching the top in what felt like seconds. At the first puzzle station, her mind was clear and focused, solving the logic problem in half the expected time. The cargo net traverse became a flowing dance, her small hands and feet finding purchase points that larger candidates couldn't use. Danny Morrison, who had been leading, began to struggle with the puzzles. His physical dominance couldn't help him with problems that required pure cognitive processing, and the accumulated fatigue was affecting his mental clarity. Sarah passed him at the second puzzle station, working through a complex mathematical sequence while he was still reading the problem statement. Alex Petrov maintained his steady pace, but Sarah's sprint strategy was opening up a gap. By the time she reached the final wall climb, she had built a lead of nearly 2 full minutes, an enormous margin in a course where seconds mattered. The final puzzle was the most complex, a tactical scenario that required candidates to analyze a simulated battlefield situation and develop a response plan. It was designed to take at least 5 minutes for even the sharpest minds. Sarah approached the problem with the same flowing mindset she'd applied to the physical obstacles. Instead of getting bogged down in details, she saw the scenario as a complete system, identifying the critical elements that would drive the solution. Her answer came together in under 3 minutes. As she turned toward the final quarter mile run, Sarah realized something extraordinary was happening. According to her internal time sense, she was on pace to not just beat the existing record, but to shatter it completely. The realization should have been energizing, but instead, it triggered a moment of doubt that nearly derailed everything. As she began the final run, her legs suddenly felt like they were made of concrete. The accumulated fatigue of the entire course hit her all at once, and she stumbled, nearly falling to her knees just 50 yards from the finish line. Behind her, she could hear Danny Morrison's footsteps getting closer. Alex Petrov was somewhere in the distance, but Morrison was closing fast, his superior endurance finally paying off in the final stretch. This was the moment that would define everything that came next. Sarah had 2 choices. She could accept that she'd given her maximum effort and allow her body to carry her to whatever finish awaited, or she could find something deeper than physical capability to draw upon. As she struggled to regain her footing, Sarah's mind flashed back to every moment in her life when people had told her she was too small, too weak, not built for this kind of challenge. She thought about the instructors who had expected her to wash out during the first week, the classmates who had quietly wagered on when she'd quit, and the well-meaning advisors who had suggested she consider more appropriate career paths. But more than that, she thought about the hundreds of women who would come after her, who would face the same doubts and limitations she'd encountered. This moment wasn't just about her anymore. Sarah straightened up and began running again, but something fundamental had changed. She wasn't running away from failure anymore. She was running toward a future that didn't exist yet, one that she was going to create with every step. The finish line came into view, and with it, the timing clock that would determine whether the impossible had actually happened. Chief Rodriguez stood beside the timer, his stopwatch in hand, his expression unreadable. Sarah crossed the line and immediately collapsed, her body finally surrendering to the accumulated stress of the course. Around her, instructors and remaining candidates gathered as Chief Rodriguez looked down at his stopwatch, then up at the official timing system, then back at his watch again. The numbers on both devices showed the same impossible result. But that's where this part of the story ends, because what happened in the moments after Sarah crossed that finish line would change not just her life, but the entire future of naval special warfare training. The record she set that day would stand as more than just a number on a board. It would become proof that the limits everyone believed were absolute were actually just the boundaries of what had been tried before. As Sarah lay in the sand, gasping for air while medical personnel checked her condition, she had no idea that her performance had been so far beyond the previous record that it would require a complete reevaluation of what human beings were capable of achieving. She just knew that she had refused to quit when quitting would have been the reasonable choice. And sometimes, that refusal to accept the reasonable choice is the only thing that stands between the world as it is and the world as it could be. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as Chief Rodriguez stared at the numbers displayed on his stopwatch. 87 minutes and 43 seconds. He blinked hard, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him after the long morning of evaluations. The official electronic timing system showed the same impossible figure. Around the finish line, a crowd had begun to gather. Word travels fast in military training environments, especially when something unprecedented occurs. Instructors from other phases of the program materialized from nearby training areas, drawn by radio chatter about an anomaly in Phase 3 testing. Sarah remained on the ground, her chest rising and falling in rapid succession as her body processed the massive oxygen debt she'd accumulated during the final sprint. Medical corpsman Lisa Martinez knelt beside her, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. Sarah's heart rate was elevated, but not dangerously so, and her mental responses to basic questions were sharp and clear. "Can you sit up?" Corpsman Martinez asked, her voice professionally calm despite the excitement building around them. Sarah nodded and pushed herself into a sitting position, sand clinging to her soaked uniform. As her vision cleared, she noticed the unusual crowd formation and the intense discussions happening just beyond earshot. Something in the atmosphere felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't immediately identify. Danny Morrison crossed the finish line 12 seconds later, immediately doubling over with exhaustion. His time of 88 minutes and 28 seconds would have been extraordinary. Under normal circumstances, easily the second-best performance in the course's history. But in the shadow of what had just occurred, it seemed almost pedestrian. Alex Petrov finished third at 91 minutes and 6 seconds, still well under the previous record. As he caught his breath, his eyes found the timing display, and his expression shifted from exhaustion to confusion to something approaching disbelief. "Chief, is that timer malfunctioning?" Petrov gasped, pointing at the electronic display that still showed Sarah's time in bright red digits. Chief Rodriguez had been asking himself the same question. In 22 years of military service, he'd seen exceptional performances that pushed the boundaries of human capability. But what he'd just witnessed fell into a category he'd never encountered before. Admiral Wallace approached the timing station, her presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the area. She examined both timing systems herself, then requested the backup stopwatches from the other evaluating instructors. All showed variations of the same impossible result. "Corpsman Martinez, what's your assessment?" Admiral Wallace asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions based on incomplete information. "Candidate Chen shows signs of severe exertion, but no indicators of medical distress," Martinez reported. "Heart rate, blood pressure, and cognitive responses all within acceptable parameters for someone who just completed this level of physical activity." Admiral Wallace turned her attention to Sarah, who was now standing upright, but still breathing heavily. "Candidate Chen, do you understand what just happened?" Sarah looked around at the assembled crowd, noting the mix of amazement and skepticism on the faces surrounding her. "Ma'am, I completed the course to the best of my ability. I'm not certain what my time was." "Your time was 87 minutes and 43 seconds, Admiral Wallace stated, watching carefully for Sarah's reaction. "That's nearly 7 minutes faster than the previous record, which has stood for 6 years. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 7 minutes wasn't just an improvement. It was a complete redefinition of what was considered possible. She had expected to finish respectably, perhaps even to surprise some doubters, but this result transcended her most optimistic projections. "Ma'am, is there any possibility of timing error?" Sarah asked, her analytical mind immediately questioning data that seemed to defy logic. "That's exactly what we need to determine," Admiral Wallace replied. "Chief Rodriguez, I want a complete technical review of all timing systems. I also want video footage from every camera angle analyzed frame by frame." As the immediate crowd began to disperse, following Admiral Wallace's directive to conduct a thorough investigation, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. Instead of celebrating a potential achievement, she was now the subject of an inquiry designed to verify whether her performance was legitimate. The next 6 hours unfolded in a surreal sequence of debriefings, technical reviews, and medical evaluations. Sarah was escorted to a private room where she underwent the most comprehensive physical examination of her military career. Blood tests, cardiac monitoring, neurological assessments, every system in her body was scrutinized for signs of performance enhancement or medical abnormality. Meanwhile, a team of technical specialists dissected the timing systems with forensic precision. They discovered that not only were all the electronic systems functioning correctly, but the backup manual timing had been conducted by 3 different instructors, all yielding consistent results within seconds of each other. The video analysis proved even more revealing. High-speed cameras had captured Sarah's movement through each section of the course, and when her techniques were studied in slow motion, patterns emerged that explained how her seemingly impossible time had been achieved. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, the program's biomechanics specialist, led the video review. Her expertise in human performance analysis had helped optimize training methods for thousands of special operations candidates over the past decade. What we're seeing here represents a fundamental shift in approach, Commander Hayes explained to Admiral Wallace as they reviewed footage from the rope climbing sections. Most candidates attack each obstacle with maximum force, treating them as individual challenges to be conquered. Chun treated the entire course as a single integrated system. The video showed Sarah's technique in crystalline detail. During transitions between obstacles, while other candidates paused to rest or reorient themselves, Sarah maintained momentum through flowing movements that preserved both energy and time. Her smaller stature, traditionally viewed as a disadvantage, had been leveraged into superior efficiency in tight spaces and technical climbing sections. Look at this sequence. Commander Hayes highlighted a section where Sarah navigated the rope bridge. She's using micro-adjustments in balance and weight distribution that allow her to maintain speed while larger candidates have to slow down to maintain stability. But the technical analysis revealed something even more significant than superior technique. The video showed that during the final quarter of the course, when most candidates begin to deteriorate physically and mentally, Sarah had actually improved her performance metrics. This is the most interesting finding, Commander Hayes noted, pointing to data graphs that tracked movement efficiency throughout the course. Her speed increased, her precision improved, and her decision-making accelerated during the final sections. Physiologically, that shouldn't be possible under these stress conditions. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the program's sports psychologist, had been reviewing Sarah's psychological profile alongside her performance data. His findings added another layer to the growing mystery. Chun's psychological testing shows exceptional stress tolerance and what we call negative split mentality, the ability to perform better under increasing pressure rather than degrading. Like most individuals, Dr. Rodriguez explained. But even accounting for superior psychological resilience, this level of performance acceleration under fatigue is unprecedented in our database. As the investigation continued, word of Sarah's achievement began to spread beyond the immediate training environment. Secure communications carried news of the record-breaking performance up the chain of command, reaching offices in the Pentagon where similar feats were discussed in the context of national security implications. General Patricia Morrison, Joint Chiefs Liaison for Special Operations, received a classified briefing about the incident within 8 hours of its occurrence. Her immediate question focused not on how the performance was achieved, but on what it meant for the future of military training and capability development. If one candidate can exceed our theoretical limits by this margin, General Morrison noted during a secure video conference, it suggests our understanding of human potential in military applications may be fundamentally flawed. Back at the training facility, Sarah found herself in an increasingly isolated position. While the investigation continued, She was separated from the other candidates to prevent any potential influence on ongoing evaluations. She spent the evening in a private quarters, reviewing the events of the day and trying to process their implications. The knock on her door came at 2100 hours. Admiral Wallace entered, followed by Chief Rodriguez and Commander Hayes. Their expressions were serious, but not hostile. The look of professionals who had reached conclusions they were still trying to fully understand. Candidate Chun, we've completed our preliminary investigation, Admiral Wallace began, taking a seat across from Sarah. All timing systems were functioning correctly, all procedures were followed properly, and medical screening has revealed no irregularities in your physiology. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The validation of her achievement was gratifying, but she sensed that bigger questions were still pending. However, Admiral Wallace continued, your performance raises questions that extend beyond this training program. What you accomplished today challenges fundamental assumptions about human capability in military applications. Commander Hayes leaned forward, her scientific curiosity evident. We'd like to understand how you developed your approach to the course. Your techniques show sophisticated understanding of biomechanics and systems optimization that typically requires years of specialized training. Sarah considered her response carefully. The truth was that her approach had been largely intuitive, born from years of diverse athletic experience and an analytical mindset that naturally sought efficient solutions. But she recognized that her explanation needed to be more substantial than it felt right. Ma'am, I've been involved in competitive athletics since childhood, Sarah began. Gymnastics, rock climbing, swimming, martial arts. Each sport taught me different ways to move efficiently and conserve energy. When I studied the course layout, I saw patterns that reminded me of combined events I'd trained for in civilian competition. She paused, organizing her thoughts. I also realized early in training that I couldn't compete directly with larger, stronger candidates using conventional approaches. I had to find advantages in areas where size and raw strength mattered less. But the final quarter of your performance, Dr. Rodriguez interjected, showed improvement rather than degradation. How do you explain maintaining and actually increasing performance while under maximum physical stress? This was the question Sarah had been asking herself since crossing the finish line. The honest answer was that she didn't fully understand it herself, but she had theories. Sir, I think something changed in my mindset during the final section, she said. Instead of fighting against the fatigue, I started working with it. I stopped thinking about the pain and focused entirely on the flow of movement from one obstacle to the next. Admiral Wallace exchanged glances with her colleagues. Sarah's explanation aligned with emerging theories in sports psychology about flow states and peak performance, but applying those concepts under the extreme stress of military training was virtually unheard of. There's another aspect we need to discuss, Admiral Wallace said, her tone shifting to something more formal. Your performance today has attracted attention from higher levels of command. There are questions about whether this achievement represents an individual anomaly or indicates potential for broader applications in training methodology. The implications of that statement began to dawn on Sarah. Her record-breaking performance wasn't just a personal achievement. It was being viewed as data that could influence military training doctrine for thousands of future candidates. What does that mean for my continuation in the program? Sarah asked. You'll continue through Phase 3 as planned, Chief Rodriguez answered. But you should be prepared for additional scrutiny and evaluation. Your techniques and training methods are going to be studied extensively. As the senior staff prepared to leave, Admiral Wallace turned back with one final observation. Candidate Chun, what you accomplished today broke more than just a time record. You've demonstrated that our understanding of human limits in this environment may be incomplete. That discovery could have implications that extend far beyond this training facility. After they departed, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, trying to process the magnitude of what had occurred. She had entered the course hoping to prove she belonged in the program. Instead, she had apparently proven that the program itself might need to evolve. Outside her window, she could see lights still burning in the administrative buildings where analysts continued studying footage and data from her performance. Somewhere in those buildings, decisions were being made about the future direction of military training based on 87 minutes and 43 seconds of her life. The weight of that responsibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sarah had wanted to make a mark in military history, but she was beginning to realize that the mark might be larger than she had ever imagined possible. As she prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued scrutiny, Sarah reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought her to this moment. She had started the day as an underestimated candidate fighting to prove her worth. She was ending it as a case study that might reshape military training for the next generation. The transformation felt surreal, but as she reviewed the events, in her mind, Sarah began to understand that breaking the record had been only the beginning of her real test. Now she had to prove that her achievement wasn't just a fluke, but represented a sustainable approach that others could learn from and adapt. Tomorrow would reveal whether Sarah Chun had simply had the performance of her life, or whether she had discovered something fundamental about human potential that had been overlooked by decades of military training doctrine. The answer to that question would determine not just her future, but potentially the future of every candidate who followed in her footsteps. 3 days after Sarah's record-breaking performance, the Naval Special Warfare Training Command buzzed with an energy unlike anything Chief Rodriguez had experienced in his 2 decades of service. Secure phone lines carried encrypted conversations to Washington, D.C., while teams of analysts pored over biomechanical data that challenged everything they thought they knew about human performance limits. The morning briefing room had been transformed into something resembling a research laboratory. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with movement diagrams, performance metrics, and psychological profiles. Dr. Amanda Foster, a leading expert in human performance optimization from the Naval Research Laboratory, had arrived the previous evening with a team of specialists whose security clearances were higher than most of the base's permanent staff. Sarah entered the briefing room to find herself facing a panel of experts whose combined experience represented centuries of military training innovation. Besides Admiral Wallace and Dr. Foster, the group included Colonel James Patterson from Army Special Forces, who had pioneered several breakthrough training methodologies, and Dr. Rachel Kim, a neurophysiologist whose research in distress response mechanisms had revolutionized understanding of peak performance. Candidate Chun, thank you for joining us, Admiral Wallace began. What we're about to discuss will remain classified at the highest levels. Your performance has implications that extend beyond this training facility. Dr. Foster activated a large display screen that showed a 3-dimensional analysis of Sarah's movement through the obstacle course. The visualization looked like something from a science fiction film, with colored trails indicating energy expenditure, momentum vectors, and efficiency ratings throughout the course. Traditional military training assumes that performance degrades under sustained stress, Dr. Foster explained, manipulating the display to highlight specific segments. Your performance data shows the opposite pattern, improvement under increasing stress loads. The display zoomed in on the final quarter of the course, where Sarah's efficiency metrics showed dramatic improvement rather than the expected decline. During this section, your movement became more precise, your decision-making accelerated, and your energy utilization actually became more efficient. Colonel Patterson leaned forward, his weathered face showing the skepticism of someone who had seen countless training innovations come and go. Dr. Foster, I've trained thousands of special operations candidates, What you're describing contradicts basic physiological principles. That's exactly why this case is significant, Dr. Kim interjected. Traditional stress response theory predicts degradation under sustained high-intensity conditions. But emerging research suggests that certain individuals may possess neurological variations that allow them to access enhanced cognitive and physical states under extreme stress. Sarah listened to the discussion with growing fascination and concern. These experts were talking about her performance as if it represented a fundamental breakthrough in understanding human capability. But she still felt like the same person who had struggled through basic training exercises just months earlier. "Ma'am, if I may ask," Sarah addressed Admiral Wallace, "what does this mean for my training progression? Will I continue with my class?" Admiral Wallace exchanged glances with Dr. Foster before responding. "Your situation has become more complex than standard training progression. Your classmates will continue through Phase 3 as scheduled, but we need to understand whether your achievement represents an isolated incident or a reproducible methodology." Dr. Foster pulled up another display, this one showing comparative data from elite athletes across various sports. "We've identified similar performance patterns in a small percentage of Olympic-level competitors and extreme sports athletes. Individuals who seem to transcend normal human limitations under specific conditions." The implication was becoming clear. Sarah wasn't just being evaluated as a Navy SEAL candidate anymore. She was being studied as a potential key to unlocking enhanced human performance for military applications. "We'd like to propose a modified training track," Colonel Patterson explained. "You'll continue working towards SEAL qualification, but you'll also participate in experimental training protocols designed to understand and potentially replicate your performance capabilities." The proposal both excited and concerned Sarah. On one hand, it represented an opportunity to contribute to military advancement in ways she had never imagined. On the other hand, it meant becoming a test subject in an environment where the boundaries of acceptability might be very different from standard training. Dr. Kim seemed to sense Sarah's hesitation. "This isn't about turning you into a laboratory experiment. It's about understanding whether the breakthrough you achieved can be taught to others, potentially saving lives and enhancing mission effectiveness." Admiral Wallace stood up, signaling the end of the briefing. "You have 24 hours to consider the proposal. This is entirely voluntary. You can continue through standard training if you prefer. But understand that your performance has opened a door that we've never had access to before." As Sarah left the briefing room, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. The military career she had planned was evolving into something entirely unexpected, with implications she was only beginning to grasp. The training facility felt different as she walked back to her quarters. Other candidates looked at her with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and something approaching wariness. Word of her record had spread throughout the base, but the details remained classified, creating an atmosphere of speculation and rumor. Danny Morrison approached her outside the dining facility, his expression unreadable. Sarah braced herself for potential resentment or accusations, given that his own exceptional performance had been overshadowed by her achievement. "Chun, I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday," he said, his tone serious but not hostile. "Morrison, your time was incredible too," Sarah replied. "Under normal circumstances, you would have set a new record." Danny shook his head. "That's not what this is about. I've been thinking about your techniques during the course. Some of the things you did, the way you moved through transitions, the timing of your energy expenditure, it was like you were operating with information the rest of us didn't have." Sarah considered how to respond. The investigation was ongoing, and she had been instructed not to discuss specifics of her performance with other candidates. But Danny's observation was perceptive and deserved an honest response. "I approached it differently," she said carefully. "Instead of trying to dominate each obstacle, I tried to flow through the course as efficiently as possible. That's what I mean, Danny pressed. Where did you learn to think about military training that way? Because it's not anything they teach in any program I've been through. The question struck to the heart of what made Sarah's achievement so significant. Her approach hadn't come from military training doctrine or established athletic methodology. It had emerged from an intuitive understanding of movement and efficiency that seemed to transcend traditional training frameworks. That evening, Sarah made her decision about the experimental training proposal. She called Admiral Wallace's office and requested a meeting to discuss the details. The meeting took place in Admiral Wallace's private office, a space that reflected decades of military service through carefully arranged commendations, unit photos, and mementos from deployments around the world. But what caught Sarah's attention were the technical manuals and research papers scattered across the desk, evidence that Admiral Wallace was deeply engaged with the scientific implications of recent events. "I've decided to accept the experimental training track," Sarah announced without preamble. Admiral Wallace nodded, as if she had expected this decision. "What convinced you?" "The possibility that this could help other people achieve things they didn't think were possible," Sarah replied. "If my experience yesterday represents something that can be learned and taught, then it needs to be explored." "I should warn you," Admiral Wallace said. "The experimental track will be significantly more demanding than standard SEAL training. You'll be working with researchers who push the boundaries of what we understand about human performance. Some of the protocols haven't been tested extensively." Sarah had anticipated this warning. Cutting-edge research always involved unknown risks, and the potential benefits seemed to justify careful exploration of those risks. "Ma'am, I understand the challenges involved. But I also understand that yesterday's performance suggests possibilities that could transform military training for future generations." Admiral Wallace smiled for the first time since Sarah had known her. "Dr. Foster and her team will be pleased. They've been developing theoretical frameworks for enhanced training methodologies for years, but they've never had a candidate who demonstrated these capabilities naturally." The conversation shifted to practical details. Sarah would continue with her current class through the remaining 2 weeks of Phase 3, but she would also begin working with Dr. Foster's research team on experimental protocols designed to map and understand her unique performance characteristics. "There's one more thing," Admiral Wallace added as their meeting concluded. "Your achievement has attracted attention from allied military organizations. We may have observers from other nations' special operations programs studying our research." The scope of implications continued to expand. Sarah had broken a training record, but the reverberations were reaching international levels of military cooperation and research. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 72 hours. She had entered Phase 3 as an underestimated candidate fighting to prove her basic competency. Now she was becoming the focal point of research that could influence military training doctrine for decades. The weight of responsibility was significant, but so was the excitement of exploration. Sarah had always been drawn to challenges that pushed her beyond her perceived limitations. Now she was being offered the opportunity to help redefine what those limitations actually were. The next morning brought the first session with Dr. Foster's research team. Instead of joining her class for standard training exercises, Sarah reported to a specialized facility that had been rapidly configured with advanced monitoring equipment. "Today we begin mapping your performance characteristics in controlled conditions," Dr. Foster explained as technicians attached sensors that would monitor everything from muscle fiber activation to brainwave patterns. "We want to understand what happens in your body and mind when you achieve these exceptional states." The testing began with baseline measurements during standard exercises, then progressed through increasingly challenging scenarios designed to replicate the stress conditions of the record-breaking performance. What the researchers discovered in those first sessions would reshape their understanding of human potential and launch Sarah Chun toward a destiny that none of them could have predicted when she first stepped onto that obstacle course. But those discoveries also raised questions that would challenge not just military training doctrine, but fundamental assumptions about the nature of human achievement under extreme conditions. As Sarah pushed through the experimental protocols, she began to understand that her record-breaking performance had been more than just an exceptional moment. It had been a glimpse into possibilities that could transform how humans approach seemingly impossible challenges. The real test wasn't whether she could repeat her achievement. The real test was whether she could help others discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The specialized research facility hummed with activity at 0530 hours as Dr. Foster's team prepared for what they privately called the Breakthrough Protocol. Sarah stood in the center of a room that looked more like a spacecraft than a military training facility, surrounded by sensors that would monitor every conceivable aspect of her physiology during the upcoming test. Dr. Emily Watson, the team's lead neurophysiologist, attached the final electrode to Sarah's temple while explaining the morning's objectives. "We're going to attempt to recreate the conditions that triggered your performance enhancement, but in a controlled environment where we can measure exactly what's happening." The past 2 weeks had yielded fascinating but incomplete data. Sarah's baseline measurements showed exceptional but not unprecedented fitness levels. Her cognitive testing revealed superior spatial reasoning and stress tolerance, but nothing that explained the magnitude of her achievement. The mystery lay in what happened when these normal capabilities were combined under extreme conditions. Lieutenant Commander David Park, the facility's technology coordinator, monitored banks of computers that processed real-time data streams from dozens of sensors. His background in aerospace engineering had been recruited specifically for this project, bringing expertise in human-machine interface optimization that traditional military training had never required. "Chun, we're going to start with a modified version of yesterday's protocol," Dr. Foster announced from the observation deck. "The course layout is similar to what you encountered during your record performance, but we've added measurement stations throughout. The experimental course stretched through multiple connected chambers, each designed to test different aspects of physical and mental performance while maintaining continuous monitoring capabilities. Unlike the outdoor training course where Sarah had set her record, this environment allowed researchers to control variables and gather data that would have been impossible to collect in field conditions. Sarah approached the starting line with a mixture of anticipation and pressure. The weight of expectation was different now. During her record-breaking performance, she had been fighting to prove herself worthy of continuing in the program. Now she was attempting to unlock secrets that could influence military training for generations. "Remember, there's no pressure to repeat your previous performance." Dr. Kim's voice came through the facility's intercom system. "We're interested in understanding your process, not necessarily achieving identical results." But Sarah knew that wasn't entirely true. The resources being invested in this research, the high-level attention her case had attracted, the international observers who were quietly monitoring the results, all of it created expectations that went far beyond academic curiosity. The starting signal echoed through the facility, and Sarah launched into movement. Immediately, she sensed something different about this environment compared to the outdoor course. The controlled conditions, the absence of wind and natural terrain variations, the clinical atmosphere of constant monitoring, it all felt artificial in ways that affected her mental approach. During the first obstacle sequence, Sarah's technique remained sharp, but the intuitive flow she had experienced during her record performance felt forced and mechanical. The sensors captured every detail of her movement, but they also created a self-consciousness that interfered with the natural rhythm she had discovered. "Interesting," Dr. Watson murmured from the observation deck, studying real-time brain activity. "Measurements Her neural patterns are showing heightened self-awareness compared to baseline. The monitoring environment may be affecting her ability to access the flow state we observed previously. This was a problem the research team hadn't anticipated. Their scientific methodology required controlled conditions and extensive measurement, but those very conditions might be preventing the phenomenon they were trying to study. Dr. Foster made a decision that would prove crucial. Cut the real-time monitoring displays, she ordered. Maintain data collection, but eliminate all visual feedback that might be affecting her mental state. The change was immediate and dramatic. As the blinking lights and scrolling displays went dark around the course, Sarah felt the artificial constraints lift from her mind. The facility didn't transform into natural terrain, but her mental approach shifted back toward the intuitive state that had driven her. Record performance. She accelerated through the middle section of the course, her movements becoming more fluid and efficient. The researchers watched in fascination as her biometric data began showing patterns similar to those theoretical models, predicted but had never been observed in real-world conditions. Look at these neural activation patterns. Dr. Kim pointed to displays that showed Sarah's brain activity. She's showing simultaneous activation in areas that typically operate independently: analytical processing and intuitive response. Systems working in perfect coordination. But the most significant discovery was still to come. As Sarah entered the final third of the experimental course, something unprecedented began appearing in the data streams. Her muscle fiber recruitment patterns showed efficiency ratings that exceeded theoretical maximums for human physiology. Lieutenant Commander Park noticed it first. "Dr. Foster, you need to see these power output readings. Either our equipment is malfunctioning, or she's generating force in ways that don't match standard biomechanical models." Dr. Foster rushed to Park Station and studied the incoming data. The numbers showed Sarah's muscles operating at efficiency levels that textbook physiology suggested were impossible. She was generating maximum power while simultaneously optimizing for endurance, a combination that violated basic principles of human muscle function. "This can't be correct," Dr. Foster muttered, but even as she spoke, video confirmation showed Sarah moving through obstacles with a combination of power and grace that defied conventional athletic performance. The breakthrough moment came during the final obstacle, a complex climbing sequence that required candidates to navigate vertical surfaces while carrying additional weight. Sarah approached the challenge differently than anyone had ever attempted. Instead of climbing in the traditional hand-over-hand pattern, she developed a rhythm that incorporated her entire body in a flowing, almost dance-like movement. Her technique looked unconventional, even strange, but the efficiency was undeniable. More importantly, the sensor data showed something that made Dr. Foster question everything she understood about human performance. Sarah's nervous system was displaying coordination patterns that typically required years of specialized training to develop, but she was accessing them spontaneously under stress. "She's not just performing better under pressure," Dr. Foster announced to the research team. "She's actually developing new neural pathways in real time. Her brain is rewiring itself to optimize for the specific challenges she's facing." The implications were staggering. If Sarah's nervous system could adapt and optimize spontaneously during high-stress performance, it suggested possibilities for human enhancement that went far beyond traditional training methodologies. Sarah completed the experimental course in 89 minutes and 17 seconds, not quite matching her outdoor record, but still exceptional given the different conditions and equipment. More importantly, the data collected during her performance provided the research team with information they had never been able to gather before. As Sarah cooled down from the test, Dr. Foster's team huddled around computer terminals, analyzing the treasure trove of physiological and neurological data they had collected. What they discovered would require them to revise fundamental assumptions about human potential. Look at these adaptation rates. Dr. Watson highlighted specific neural measurements. Her brain is showing plasticity levels that we typically only see in developing children. But she's applying that plasticity to complex motor and cognitive tasks in real time. Colonel Patterson, despite his initial skepticism, was beginning to grasp the significance of what they were observing. If this capacity for rapid adaptation could be trained or enhanced in other candidates, it would revolutionize special operations capabilities. But Dr. Kim raised a crucial concern that would shape everything that followed. We need to understand whether Sarah's capabilities represent a natural variation in human physiology that we can identify and recruit for, or an acquired skill set that can be taught to others. The distinction was critical. If Sarah possessed rare genetic or developmental advantages, the research would focus on identification and selection of similar individuals. If her capabilities were learnable, the implications for military training would be transformative. Admiral Wallace arrived as the initial data analysis was concluding, her expression indicating that she had been receiving updates throughout the morning's testing. Dr. Foster, what are your preliminary findings? Admiral, we're looking at performance characteristics that challenge basic assumptions about human capability under stress, Dr. Foster replied. But more significantly, we're seeing evidence of real-time neural adaptation that could represent a new understanding of how humans can optimize performance. Admiral Wallace absorbed this information with the calm of someone accustomed to managing complex situations with uncertain outcomes. What do you need to advance this research? Time, resources, and additional test subjects, Dr. Foster responded. We need to determine whether Chun's capabilities are unique or represent potential that exists in others but hasn't been accessed through traditional training methods. The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Commander Park, who had been analyzing additional data streams. Dr. Foster, there's something else you need to see. The environmental monitoring shows that Chun's performance actually improved the air quality measurements in the facility during her test. The statement sounded absurd, but Park's data was clear. Sarah's breathing patterns and metabolic efficiency had been so optimized that she had actually consumed less oxygen and produced less carbon dioxide than theoretical models predicted, improving the atmospheric conditions around her. Dr. Foster stared at the environmental data, trying to process implications that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of known science. Are you suggesting her metabolic efficiency reached levels that affected her immediate environment? The data is unambiguous, Park replied. Whatever physiological optimization she achieved during peak performance had measurable effects beyond her individual body systems. Sarah, who had been quietly listening to this discussion while cooling down from her test, finally spoke up. Dr. Foster, I need to tell you something about my experience during these performances. The research team turned their attention to her, recognizing that subjective reports might provide insights that objective measurements couldn't capture. During both the record performance and today's test, there were moments when everything seemed to slow down, Sarah explained. Not just my perception of time, but my awareness of the entire environment. I could sense the optimal path through obstacles before I reached them, anticipate problems before they occurred. Dr. Kim leaned forward with intense interest. Can you describe the sensation more specifically? Was it like enhanced pattern recognition, or something more intuitive? It felt like the course was communicating with me, Sarah said, knowing how strange it sounded. I could sense the most efficient way through each challenge, as if the information was being provided rather than calculated. The research team exchanged significant glances. Sarah's description aligned with theoretical models of peak performance that had been proposed, but never documented in real-world conditions. Dr. Foster made a decision that would determine the next phase of the research. We're going to expand the experimental protocol. I want to test whether this enhanced awareness state can be triggered consistently, and whether other candidates can be trained to access similar states." Admiral Wallace nodded her approval. "Dr. Foster, you have whatever resources you need. This research has been classified at the highest levels, and it has full support from Joint Chiefs." As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that her military career had taken a turn she could never have anticipated. She was no longer just training to become a Navy SEAL. She was helping to pioneer new understanding of human capability that could reshape military operations worldwide. The experimental protocols that would follow would push her beyond anything she had experienced before, into territory where the boundaries between individual achievement and breakthrough, scientific discovery, became impossible to distinguish. But perhaps most significantly, Sarah was beginning to understand that her record-breaking performance hadn't been an ending. It had been the beginning of discoveries that would challenge everything the military thought it knew about the limits of human potential. The question was no longer whether she could repeat her achievement. The question was whether she could help unlock capabilities that would allow others to transcend limitations they had never imagined they could overcome. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, knowing that tomorrow would bring entirely new challenges, she felt the weight and excitement of standing at the threshold of uncharted territory in human performance. The record she had set was becoming the foundation for explorations that might redefine what it meant to push beyond the possible. 6 months after her record-breaking performance, Sarah Chun stood before a joint session of Congress, her Navy dress uniform bearing the trident insignia she had earned through the most unconventional path in special operations history. The classified briefing she was about to deliver would authorize funding for the most ambitious human performance research program in military history. The experimental protocols had yielded results that exceeded every prediction. Not only had Sarah consistently demonstrated her enhanced performance capabilities, but Dr. Foster's team had successfully identified the neurological markers that predicted similar potential in other candidates. More remarkably, they had developed training methodologies that could teach aspects of Sarah's spontaneous optimization techniques to selected personnel. Senator Margaret Thompson, chair of the Armed Services Committee, called the session to order. In the secure briefing room beneath the Capitol building, the assembled lawmakers represented both parties and every military district in the country, united by the extraordinary nature of what they were about to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to learn will remain classified at the highest levels," Senator Thompson announced. "The briefing concerns breakthrough research in human performance optimization with significant implications for national security." Admiral Wallace stepped forward to provide context. 6 months ago, a Navy SEAL candidate achieved a performance that our experts considered impossible. The investigation into that achievement has led to discoveries that could transform military training and operational capabilities. Dr. Foster activated a secure presentation system that displayed performance comparisons from the past half-year of research. Working with candidate Chun and a carefully selected group of test subjects, we have documented repeatable enhancement of human performance that exceeds previously established physiological limits. The data was undeniable. 15 additional candidates had been put through modified versions of Sarah's experimental training protocols. All 15 had shown significant improvement in their performance metrics, with 3 achieving results that approached Sarah's original record-breaking levels. But the most significant discovery hadn't been individual performance enhancement. It had been the identification of what Dr. Foster's team called cascade optimization, the ability for enhanced performers to positively influence the performance of entire teams through their presence and techniques. The implications extend beyond individual capability, Colonel Patterson explained to the congressional panel. Enhanced performers appear to elevate the capabilities of their teammates through mechanisms we're still working to understand fully. Sarah had experienced this phenomenon firsthand during joint training exercises with international special operations units. When she applied her optimization techniques during team-based scenarios, the entire unit's performance improved measurably. Even though other team members weren't directly trained in her methodologies, SSA Captain James Mitchell had described the experience in his classified after-action report. Operating alongside Chun felt like having access to enhanced situational awareness. Her movement patterns and decision-making seemed to create opportunities for the entire team that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The phenomenon had been observed consistently across multiple joint exercises with allies from Australia, Canada, Norway, and the United Kingdom. Enhanced performers weren't just individually more capable, they were force multipliers who enhanced overall unit effectiveness. Dr. Kim stepped forward to address the neurological aspects of their discoveries. Our research indicates that the enhanced performance state involves a form of environmental integration that we're calling systemic awareness. Subjects develop the ability to perceive and respond to complex environmental systems as unified information networks. The technical explanation was groundbreaking, but Sarah knew the reality felt much simpler. During enhanced performance states, the distinction between herself and her environment seemed to dissolve. Instead of fighting against obstacles or challenges, she found ways to work with them as part of a larger system seeking optimal outcomes. Representative Charles Williams from the House Intelligence Committee raised the question everyone was thinking. Dr. Foster, what are the potential applications of this research beyond military training? Dr. Foster had anticipated this question, and her response would shape the future direction of the program. The optimization techniques we've documented have potential applications in emergency response, medical procedures, disaster relief operations, and any high-stress environment where human performance directly impacts life and death outcomes. Scope was staggering. Sarah's training breakthrough was pointing toward capabilities that could enhance human performance across every field where exceptional ability under pressure made the difference between success and failure. But Senator Thompson raised the concern that had been privately discussed in security briefings for weeks. What are the risks associated with this research? Are we potentially creating capabilities that could be misused or that might have unintended consequences? Admiral Wallace fielded this question directly. Senator, our research protocols include extensive ethical oversight and safety monitoring. The enhancement techniques we've documented appear to optimize natural human capabilities rather than introducing artificial modifications. The risks are comparable to those associated with elite athletic training. Dr. Foster added crucial context. Our findings suggest that these capabilities may represent evolutionary potential that exists naturally in human physiology but hasn't been systematically accessed through traditional training methods. We're not creating artificial enhancements. We're discovering natural capabilities. Sarah was asked to provide her personal perspective on the ethical implications of the research. Senators, my experience has been that these techniques enhance human capability in ways that align with positive values, improve teamwork, better decision-making under stress, more efficient resource utilization. The applications I've seen have consistently focused on helping people achieve their best possible performance. The congressional briefing concluded with authorization for expanded research funding and recruitment of additional test subjects from allied military organizations. Sarah's achievement had evolved from an individual accomplishment into an international research collaboration with implications that extended far beyond military applications. Following the briefing, Sarah found herself in an unprecedented position. Within the military hierarchy, she had completed Navy SEAL training with distinction, but her role had evolved into something entirely new, a bridge between operational capability and scientific discovery. Her first operational assignment reflected this unique status. Instead of deploying with a traditional SEAL team, Sarah was assigned to a joint task force that combined special operations personnel with research scientists, tasked with field testing enhanced performance techniques in real-world scenarios. Assignment took her to remote training facilities where elite personnel from multiple nations worked together to develop and refine the optimization methodologies that had emerged from her original breakthrough. But more importantly, it connected her with individuals whose natural capabilities suggested they might be able to access similar enhanced states. Master Sergeant Jennifer Rodriguez from Army Special Forces demonstrated intuitive tactical awareness that bordered on precognition during urban warfare simulations. Captain Wei Jiang from the Chinese People's Liberation Army showed biomechanical efficiency that allowed him to carry equipment loads that should have been impossible for someone of his size. Flight Lieutenant Sarah McNeil from the Royal Air Force displayed reaction times during high-G maneuvers that exceeded what aviation medicine considered physiologically feasible. Working with these exceptional individuals, Sarah began to understand that her original achievement hadn't been a unique anomaly. Instead, it had been an example of human potential that existed in many people but was rarely accessed through conventional training approaches. The international collaboration led to the development of what became known as the Chen Protocol, a training methodology that could identify and develop enhanced performance capabilities in candidates who showed the appropriate neurological and psychological markers. Within 18 months of Sarah's original record-breaking performance, modified versions of the Chen Protocol were being implemented in special operations training programs across NATO allies. The results consistently showed improvement in candidate performance, with approximately 15% of trainees demonstrating significant enhancement capabilities. But perhaps the most significant outcome wasn't measured in performance metrics or military capabilities. Sarah's breakthrough had opened a conversation about human potential that extended into civilian applications with profound implications for society. Emergency medical teams trained using adapted versions of the Chen Protocol showed improved performance during crisis situations. Search and rescue organizations reported enhanced team coordination and individual capability among personnel trained in the optimization techniques. Professional athletes, working with sports scientists who had consulted on the military research, began accessing performance states that redefined competitive achievement in multiple sports. The ripple effects continued expanding, touching fields as diverse as education, where modified stress optimization techniques helped students perform better during high-pressure testing situations, and space exploration, where astronauts trained using enhanced performance protocols showed superior capability during demanding mission scenarios. 2 years after her original achievement, Sarah received a promotion to lieutenant commander and assignment to lead the newly established Human Performance Optimization Division. Her role involved overseeing research that had grown into a multi-billion-dollar program involving dozens of institutions and hundreds of researchers worldwide. Standing in her new office at the Pentagon, Sarah reflected on the trajectory that had brought her from an underestimated SEAL candidate to the leader of research that was reshaping understanding of human capability. The record she had set on that Virginia Beach training course had been just the beginning of a journey that none of them could have predicted. But the most meaningful aspect of her story wasn't the scientific breakthroughs or the military applications or the international recognition. It was the message her achievement had sent to every person who had ever been told they weren't big enough, strong enough, or capable enough to pursue their highest aspirations. Sarah's performance had demonstrated that human limits were often psychological constructs rather than physiological realities, and that breakthroughs occurred when individuals refused to accept conventional wisdom about what was possible. Training facilities where her research continued buzzed with activity from candidates who approached their challenges differently because they had learned that exceptional achievement often required abandoning traditional approaches in favor of innovative solutions. Her story had become part of military training curricula, not because it provided a template to copy, but because it demonstrated that breakthrough performance required individuals to discover their own unique pathways to excellence. Standing at her office window, looking out over the Virginia landscape where her journey had begun, Sarah understood that her greatest achievement hadn't been breaking an unbreakable record. It had been proving that the boundaries everyone accepted as absolute were actually just the limits of what had been attempted before. The legacy of that muddy morning when she had fallen 7 times before finding her footing had become a foundation for discoveries that would influence human achievement for generations. Her story had started with a refusal to quit when quitting seemed reasonable. It had evolved into proof that the most extraordinary achievements often begin with the simple decision to get back up when everyone expects you to stay down. And in facilities around the world where people continued pushing beyond what they thought possible, Sarah Chun's breakthrough served as daily reminder that human potential remained largely unexplored territory, waiting for individuals brave enough to venture beyond the boundaries of the previously achieved. The record books would show her time as 87 minutes and 43 seconds. But the real measure of her achievement was counted in the thousands of people who had learned that their own limits were far beyond anything they had previously imagined. Sometimes the most important victories aren't measured in numbers on a scoreboard, but in the expansion of what an entire species believes about its own potential. Sarah's story had started with a fall, continued with a record, and concluded with a revolution in human capability that would influence achievement for decades to come. The woman who had been too small, too weak, and too unconventional for traditional military expectations had become the architect of new understanding about what humans could accomplish when they refused to be limited by conventional wisdom. Her legacy would be measured not just in the records she had broken, but in the barriers she had proven didn't actually exist. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.